Welcome back to History Addict, where we dive deep into the past to uncover the stories, decisions, and battles that shaped our world. Today, we're revisiting one of the most controversial moments in American military history, the Battle of Little Bighorn. Was Marcus Reno's retreat an act of cowardice, or was he making a critical tactical decision? Let's explore the facts, the myths, and the legacy behind this infamous event. Get ready for a journey through history like never before. Join us as we uncover the truth behind Reno's retreat and discover whether modern historians have judged him fairly. Let's dive in. Marcus Reno, a seasoned military officer whose career spanned the American Civil War and the Great Sioux War, is a pivotal yet controversial figure in the story of the Battle of Little Bighorn, fought on June 25 to 26, 1876. As second-in-command to General George Armstrong Custer, Reno's actions during the battle have long been scrutinized, eventually leading to a court-martial and his dismissal from the Army. However, his legacy was later reevaluated and posthumously redeemed. Today, Reno's first-hand account of the battle offers critical insights into one of America's most infamous military defeats, commonly known as Custer's Last Stand. This analysis of Marcus Reno's testimony is not just about his actions. It also reveals the complex dynamics of battle strategy, the overwhelming strength of Sioux and Cheyenne warriors, and the profound consequences that followed for both sides. On the morning of June 25, 1876, under orders from General Custer, Reno led a detachment of approximately 140 men from the 7th Cavalry to attack a large Native American encampment along the Little Bighorn River. Custer, convinced that a rapid surprise attack would quickly subdue the Lakota Sioux and Northern Cheyenne warriors, made a critical decision to divide his forces into 3 separate groups. This tactical choice, meant to encircle the village, would later prove disastrous. As Reno's troops advanced about 1.5 miles, they began hearing gunfire from the direction of the village. The rugged terrain, with its rolling hills, ravines, and patches of thick cottonwoods, provided cover for native warriors who had likely anticipated the U.S. Army's attack. Historians estimate that between 2,500 and 5,000 warriors, under the leadership of Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Gall, had gathered after their victory at the Battle of Rosebud just days earlier. According to Reno's official testimony, we moved forward at a rapid pace, the village appearing quiet at first, but within minutes warriors appeared in large numbers, and it was evident we were outflanked. What followed was a swift and brutal engagement. As Reno's forces approached the village, they were met with an intense counterattack from the Sioux and Cheyenne warriors. These native forces, some on horseback and others on foot, outnumbered Reno's detachment by an overwhelming margin. According to James Donovan in his book A Terrible Glory, the native forces, fresh from their victory at Rosebud, were both well-organized and highly motivated to protect their lands. Facing heavy fire and unable to maintain his position, Reno ordered his men to dismount and form a skirmish line in a nearby tree line along the river. However, the pressure from the native warriors was too great. In his official report, Reno described the dire situation. It was soon evident that we were being enveloped on both sides. The Indians were swarming in larger numbers than we had imagined possible. Realizing that his position along the river was indefensible and fearing a total rout, Reno ordered a retreat to the high ground, the bluffs overlooking the river. This retreat, however, turned into a chaotic flight, with native warriors in close pursuit. Several of Reno's men were killed during the withdrawal, including Lieutenant Hodgson, whose death left a lasting mark on Reno. The retreat is vividly described by Lieutenant Edward McGuire, who later mapped the battlefield. The retreat was disorderly. Horses, men, and equipment were scattered along the valley floor as Reno's men fled to the high ground. Reno himself described the scene with a sense of defeat. There was no option but to retreat. The men were scattered and disoriented, and many were killed as we crossed the river. Lieutenant Hodgson fell next to me, a loss that weighed heavily on my conscience. Once on the Bluffs, Reno regrouped with what remained of his command. His men, exhausted and demoralized, hastily took cover behind the sparse brush and began digging shallow trenches using makeshift tools, knives, canteens, and plates. Captain Thomas Weir, one of Reno's officers, recalled the grim conditions. The air was filled with the sound of war cries and gunfire. We were entrenched in shallow ditches with nowhere to run. The men were reaching their breaking point. The night of June 25th offered little respite. Reno's forces remained entrenched, fearing another assault at dawn. By 2:30 a.m. on June 26th, the native warriors renewed their attack, concentrating their efforts on Reno's vulnerable horse herd. Positioned on a distant hill, beyond the range of Reno's carbines, the warriors launched a series of well-coordinated assaults. Throughout the morning, Reno's command struggled to fend off waves of attacks, all while dealing with mounting casualties and an acute shortage of water. In these crucial hours, Colonel Frederick Benteen, who had been delayed while escorting the pack train, finally arrived with reinforcements. His small force provided much-needed support, but the situation remained critical. Recognizing the dire need for water, Benteen led a mission to retrieve water from a stream approximately 600 yards away, under heavy enemy fire. Benteen's mission was heroic but costly. According to Evan Connell in Son of the Morning Star, with no choice, Benteen organized a desperate mission to retrieve water, sending men down to the river under constant fire. It was an act of bravery and necessity that likely saved many lives. Despite their precarious situation, Reno's men held their position. Reno later recalled the desperate fight. The ground was strewn with the dead and dying. The stench of smoke and blood filled the air, but still, the men fought with a courage that defied their exhaustion. As the day wore on, the intensity of the native attacks gradually diminished. From his position on the bluffs, Reno observed large plumes of smoke rising from the valley below as the Sioux and Cheyenne warriors began to withdraw. They had set fire to parts of the valley, using the smoke as cover to retreat in an organized military formation toward the Bighorn Mountains. Reno, unaware of Custer's fate, initially believed that the movement might signal Custer's return. However, the tragic truth soon became clear. On the morning of June 27th, General Alfred Terry arrived with reinforcements, bringing with him the devastating news. Custer and over 200 of his men had been wiped out just a few miles away. Terry dispatched Benteen's company to investigate the battlefield where Custer's detachment had made its last stand. There, they found the bodies of Custer, Captain Miles Keogh, and others strewn across the ridge. Captain Keogh's body, notably untouched except for the removal of his weapons, stood as a testament to his valor. Curley, a Crow scout and the only survivor from Custer's command, later described how Keogh's final stand had earned him respect from the native warriors. In his report, Lieutenant Godfrey summed up the grim scene. "The full weight of the tragedy hit us like a hammer. We realized we were fighting for our lives, while Custer and his men were already dead." One of the central factors contributing to the disaster at Little Bighorn was Custer's decision to divide his forces. This choice violated a fundamental military principle. When facing a larger, highly mobile enemy, dividing one's forces weakens overall strength. Custer, believing that speed and surprise would be decisive, sent Reno's command to attack the village, while he took another route to flank the enemy. Historian Robert Utley, in his book Cavalier in Buckskin, notes, Custer's decision to divide his regiment was not inherently reckless, but it was fatally flawed due to the vastly superior numbers of the native forces. His refusal to wait for reinforcements sealed his fate. Similarly, Stephen Ambrose in Crazy Horse and Custer wrote, Custer's reliance on speed and surprise, without full intelligence on the size of the native forces, was a classic military blunder. For the Sioux and Cheyenne, the Battle of Little Bighorn was not only a military engagement, but a defense of their way of life. Sitting Bull, the spiritual leader of the Lakota Sioux, had experienced a vision days before the battle, in which he saw soldiers falling like grasshoppers from the sky. According to the oral history recorded in Stanley Vestal's biography, this vision was interpreted as a sign that the Lakota would be victorious. Crazy Horse, the brilliant tactician, played a critical role in leading the Sioux and Cheyenne forces during the battle. His mastery of hit-and-run tactics confused and overwhelmed the U.S. troops. Historian Stephen Ambrose praised Crazy Horse's battlefield leadership, stating, "He moved swiftly, confusing the 7th Cavalry with feints and charges that prevented them from organizing a cohesive defense." The psychological toll on Reno and his men during the 2-day siege cannot be understated. Trapped on the bluffs, surrounded, and constantly under fire, Reno's men faced physical and emotional exhaustion. In Reno's testimony before the Court of Inquiry, he said, "We were isolated, surrounded, and every moment felt like it could be our last. The cries of the wounded echoed in the night, and we had little hope of survival." Many of the survivors of the battle experienced what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. In Captain Weir's testimony, he described the deep emotional impact of watching comrades fall and facing the constant fear of death. Even after the fighting stopped, the terror remained with us. It was as if we were living in a nightmare from which we could not wake. After the battle, Marcus Reno's career would never fully recover. Despite his court of inquiry clearing him of wrongdoing, he was accused by some of cowardice for retreating to the Bluffs instead of continuing the charge. In the years that followed, Reno faced charges of personal misconduct and was eventually dismissed from the Army. Nearly 80 years after his death, in 1967, a military review board reviewed his case and upgraded his discharge to honorable, acknowledging the complexity of his actions during the battle. Reno's remains were reinterred at Custer National Cemetery, not far from the battlefield where history was made. The Battle of Little Bighorn remains one of the most studied and debated engagements in U.S. military history, not only for the tactical miscalculations that led to Custer's demise, but also for the profound courage displayed by both the U.S. troops and the Sioux and Cheyenne warriors. As James Donovan concluded in A Terrible Glory, the battle was a complex mixture of heroism and folly, with lessons that continue to resonate in military academies today. Reno's testimony and the analysis of his actions offer a deeper understanding of the chaos and confusion that shaped this iconic battle. While Custer's defeat has become legend, Reno's survival and eventual redemption reveal a more complex narrative, one of human error, resilience, and the cost of leadership in times of crisis.